But look, it's good to be with you. I was asked to talk about what my priorities are on the health subcommittee. And first of all, let me tell you that serving with Buddy Carter and his knowledge and his commitment to healthcare, the experience, the industry experience that he brings to the table is a real example to me, and I appreciate Buddy's passion and knowledge in this area. So you're going to learn a lot more from him this morning than you are from me. I can guarantee you that. And Dave Joyce, my neighbor to the north in my district, we butt up against each other. He represents the Cleveland area where the Cleveland Clinic is, deeply involved in healthcare, and I think you're gonna find out some interesting things from Dave as well. But my priorities on the health subcommittee obviously is, as you heard, is telehealth, increasing transparency. Transparency helps with competition. If everybody in the system and especially the consumer knows what they're getting themselves into, we see good things happen in the free enterprise system that'll lower cost and improve access. Improving access is a big deal in Appalachia. I represent a rural part of the country, and in the best of cases, access and affordability are big issues to the people that I represent. Combating the opioid epidemic that has hit my district extremely hard is another priority that I've got. On the telehealth front, as many of you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, I led the effort with some of my colleagues, and Buddy was a part of that on our committee as well, to put some waivers in place so that people could get, or providers could get, Medicare reimbursement for telehealth services across the spectrum. Those waivers have been extended twice. We're working now to make and we figured out that we don't need those restrictions in the first place, right? So we're working to try and make those waivers permanent. And even in the best of cases, people in my district, for many different reasons, lack of specialty care, distance that they have to drive to their physician, the inability to get out of their home because they're shut in. We have a large senior population. Telehealth is necessary in normal cases in rural parts of the country. And so really want to get those waivers extended, because isolations and lockdowns take a big mental toll, and mental health is a big deal too. A couple of pieces of legislation that we've worked on that I've introduced this time, the Connect for Health Act, that would waive most restrictions on telehealth for geographic restrictions, especially for rural areas. And then the Telemental Health Care Access Act eliminates the in-person requirements for Medicare beneficiaries using telemental care, because mental health care, one of the biggest opportunities for telehealth to provide a service is in mental health, when you can talk to a counselor over telehealth capabilities. And then I don't have to tell you all, you hear about it on the news. There are a few communities that are exempt from this, but we have a fentanyl. Some people call it fentanyl overdoses, but they're actually fentanyl poisonings. You've seen a lot of the activity that we're taking on with our committee to address that issue. But the open border, the amount of fentanyl that is flooding across the border into our country, we're taking action to make fentanyl-related substances Schedule 1, moving them up so that the bad guys can't change a molecule in their formula and sidestep the law. This is not a partisan issue. It should not be a partisan issue. And fortunately, we've got Democrat colleagues on the other side that agree with us that we've got to address this, and we've got to address it now because we're killing Americans. The drug is killing Americans at an alarming rate. So with that, let me turn it over to who I think Dave might be next. You're on.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
There we go.
I got it.
Similar to Bill, I had a prayer session where I go down and take my fat ass to the gym and I pray to God that I can get to the workout without having something major go wrong. And a lot of hip but I'm honored to be here with all of you today. And my esteemed staffer Will said if I didn't read every word of this, that he'd quit. So I guess I'll see you another time, Will. No, this is a very important topic, and it's mentioned in my intro that I was a public defender before I became a prosecutor. And so, as we all know, we gave up on mental health a long time ago. I'm not sure if it was the late 60s or early 70s, but we've let our state correctional facilities and our local jails become the mental health facilities that had been around in the past. And shockingly, mental health and drug addiction are usually intertwined in such a way that if you're treating one, you're treating the other. We've all seen the situations where folks have, they take the medicine and then they feel better and they don't feel they have to take the medicine again. And so it's a terrible cycle that you see when you're working in that industry, but unfortunately in that law enforcement population of watching the same people do the same things over and over and expect a different result. So when I got here, that's one of the areas that I wanted to get in. We had a bipartisan group of what we call ourselves recovering prosecutors. And we met like this for breakfast one morning and went around the room figuring where could we, with our backgrounds, have the most impact. That was opioids, to a T. Every one of us said we'd seen the increase in the cases that were going forward and see good kids from good families and sometimes their parents dying from overdoses from opioids and now, unfortunately, fentanyl. But one of the things that in my bipartisan addiction task force with Representative Tanko that I brought up in a bill that we've introduced is that unfortunately, law enforcement and first responders are the first ones there. And so, imagine going in where you're seeing a family suffering because someone's dying. And so the PTSD levels have increased dramatically inside first responders. And it was important that we be able to provide them the help and relief that they need. So that's one of the bills that we're trying to push through. But most importantly, similar to the prosecutors group, was bring in a bipartisan way, everyone together to focus on what we see in our district and how we can do something here in DC to help fix that. And certainly the COVID pandemic has exacerbated that because those of us who have been watching it for a long time know that we were starting to make some strides in 18 and 19 and saw the decrease finally in opioid deaths, only to see the loneliness of being secluded during the pandemic increase not only the problems with mental health, but also the problems with drug addiction. I thoroughly applaud what Bill was talking about, the idea with mental health, because we certainly could see that in the VA. And if somebody's having those type of issues, and we all know the number of suicides every day from our veterans, you have to be able to reach out to somebody. The isolation that the pandemic brought was something that we learned from, hopefully, and we don't ever repeat that. But just to have somebody that can call and talk to and reach out, not have them call and reach out and say, well, we'll see you in 6 weeks, but to talk to, just to get through that, maybe what's needed to bridge that gap to get them to the next day. So it's a very important issues that we're all addressing, and I look forward to having a continued discussion with all you experts out there because I was just a prosecutor. Buddy?
Well, thank y'all very much for having us here today. It is a delight to be with my two colleagues from Ohio. I was especially appreciative of them on New Year's Eve when Georgia beat Ohio State.
Keep it up, buddy. Keep it up.
Keep it up.
Adage is that, when you get to the end zone, act like you've been there before.
Yeah, okay.
When you get a championship, act like you had one.
All right, enough of that.
We're going to put a limp in that other leg.
Yeah, thanks. No, seriously, it is a delight to be with Bill Johnson and Dave Joyce. Bill, of course, is chair, and unlike Bill, I'm just a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, not a prominent member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. But Bill is chair of the Environmental Subcommittee, of which I serve on. He does a great job in that capacity, and I have to applaud him for his work, particularly on the behalf of his constituents during the awful tragedy that happened in East Palestine. And he was right there from the very beginning and on the ground and there doing whatever he could do to help. And it was just a great testament to his service as a member of Congress and as a public servant, and I commend him for that. And of course, Dave Joyce does a great job, particularly on appropriations right now. Appropriators are our best friends in Congress. We're all trying to side up to them, but he does a great job.
That's why he's here.
That's why I gotta go.
Yeah. So as you heard, for many years I was the only pharmacist in Congress. Of course, we have another pharmacist in Congress now, Diana Harshbarger from Tennessee. She's doing a great job, a rising star in our conference. So now I just have to be satisfied to be the oldest pharmacist in Congress. So, but nevertheless, it is it is important, and obviously I'm where I need to be, where I want to be, and where I should be, and that's on the Energy and Commerce Committee, on the Health Subcommittee. A lot going on there. You heard what Bill Johnson said about telehealth. We all understand telehealth and how, as the New York Times described it, it advanced 10 years in one day, and it did during the pandemic. It has now become an integral part of healthcare. That's why I've got a bill, the Telehealth Modernization Act, that will extend the flexibilities that were put into telehealth during the pandemic and make them permanent, and that's very important. It'll also make sure that that we take away the requirements for origin and physical location of where the calls start from, and it'll also allow allow other physicians to participate than just what is defined right now. That's especially important, as Bill pointed out, because of mental health issues. We all know that during the pandemic we saw an increase in suicides. That's something we've got to address. What's happening in our country right now, and I'll touch on this very briefly, but and again, it's been mentioned, the fentanyl poisoning, and it is poisoning. I want to tell you a real quick story. I embarrassed myself, and I was especially embarrassed not only as a congressman but also as a healthcare professional. And I was at a town hall meeting, and I referred to it as fentanyl addiction. And a mother corrected me, as she should have, and she stood up and she said, "No, sir, it's not fentanyl addiction." She said, "My son took one pill and he's dead. It was fentanyl poisoning." And she was right and I was wrong. And I felt 2 inches tall and just horrible. But she is right. It is fentanyl poisoning, killing over 200 people every day. Every day. Today, 200 people will die as a result of fentanyl poisoning. Folks, if an airplane were to crash this morning and kill 200 people, we'd stop every airplane in this country from flying until we figured out what happened. Yet we're losing 200 people every day, and we continue on. We know where the problem is. It's a twofold problem. The first problem is at the southern border. The amount of fentanyl that's coming in. How do you stop that? You secure the border. You stop that fentanyl from coming across. The second problem is the amount of fentanyl that's in this country right now. Enough fentanyl to kill over 1 billion people in the country right now. Now, I want to tell you something real quick. I'm often critical of the FDA, with good reason, I believe. But I have to applaud them, because earlier this year, I sent a letter to the FDA encouraging them to make naloxone available over the counter so you can go into the drugstore and buy it. Not behind the counter, but you can just go in and buy it. They did that, and I applaud them for that. That is the right thing to do. Narcan, the brand name of naloxone, is available. You can get it without a prescription. I carry it with me. I have it in my backpack. Wherever I go, if I'm on an airplane or wherever I go with my backpack, it's there. Thank God I've never had to use it. But if used quickly enough, it will reverse the effects of fentanyl. It ought to be in every medicine cabinet, in every emergency box in America. Wherever you see a defibrillator, you ought to see naloxone. It ought to be just like syrup of Ipecac. For those of you old enough to remember, we used to have syrup of Ipecac in our emergency boxes, in our medicine cabinets. It ought to be just like that. It's got to be available. So again, I applaud the FDA for what they did. Very quickly, 2 other things I want to tell you about. First of all, We know that we've had, during the pandemic, we had the national stockpiles. And the national stockpiles are important, particularly now as we are experiencing drug shortages. We need those national stockpiles. I've got legislation that, parts of it was enacted last year during the omnibus, that allows the states to have their own stockpiles. This is not to replace the federal stockpiles, but instead is to complement them and supplant and help them. That's very important. We want to supplement those national stockpiles with state stockpiles, and they may be specific to the state as to what they need in that state. So that's very important. The last thing I'll tell you about is this. I've always said there's a difference in knowing something and realizing something. We've known for many years that we were too dependent on other countries for our pharmaceutical needs. We realized it during the pandemic. Now, as a pharmacist, I'm a member of the Doctors Caucus. In the Doctors Caucus, there are 17 Republican members of the Doctors Caucus. We had a meeting and we had the ASPR, the Assistant Secretary for Emergency or for Preparedness and Emergency Response. Bob Cadillac, he told us, even though we did not know about the virus until February of 2020, they saw a downtick in the amount of PPE, in the amount of drugs that was coming from China as early as the fall of 2019, which tells us that China knew what was happening, and they were hoarding that equipment. They were hoarding those drugs. Pharmaceutical independence, just like energy independence, is necessary for national security. We have got to repatriate these pharmaceutical manufacturers back to our country. We've got to make sure that we have pharmaceutical independence. That's why I've got the Made in America Act, manufacturing active pharmaceutical ingredients, drugs, and excipients in America, utilizing the opportunity tax zones, the tax opportunity zones that were created in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, to try to bring these companies back to America, and to also work with our allies to make sure they are producing these drugs as well, so that we don't have to be dependent on our adversaries. All of that's very important. Again, I want to thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be with these two great colleagues of mine, and I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you guys very much. Buddy, you said something a little bit earlier about bringing a lot of pharmaceutical companies back to the U.S. Right now, God forbid if any of us should go to the doctor and say, you have been diagnosed with cancer, and we have a shortage of chemotherapy here in the United States. Where are we importing it from? China. Fentanyl. Where is the source of all fentanyl? China. What folks are looking to you in Congress? What are we doing about this?
Well, one of the things, as I mentioned, was the Made in America Act to try to repatriate these companies back to America. That's certainly important. And then but one of the main reasons that they left in the first place was labor costs. I mean, we all understand that. But the concern I've got, and thank you for mentioning the cancer chemotherapy drugs, because right now we've got a shortage of children's cancer chemotherapy drugs in this country. And FDA has approved getting some of these drugs from China, from some labs that have never been inspected before by the FDA. I mean, that's very concerning to me, so that we've got to address that in the immediate sense. But we've got to make sure these stockpiles and make sure that we are, right now I think there are 30 drugs that are short right now that the FDA has identified?
Over 100.
Over 100? Okay. That they've identified as being short. We need to make sure we've got a stockpile of those. We need to make sure that we get them in, and that whether it be in the state stockpiles or the federal stockpiles, the national stockpiles, that we have those drugs, and we make sure that we've got a pipeline where we're going to be able to get them. I mean, amoxicillin? You know, I've dispensed enough amoxicillin in my career to float a boat. I mean, it's just been a ton, and we're short. I mean, we got mothers in here, fathers, and your ear infections, throat infections. Amoxicillin was a staple.
Mm-mm. But is this Congress going to do anything with regard to nipping? I mean, every member of Congress has lost a constituent to fentanyl poisoning. What are we going to do? We know where the source is, and it's coming over the border as well, but we know where the source is. What are we going to do? They're looking to you guys to fix this.
Well, it's a good point, Jim, and until we declare war on it, we're losing this battle. And so I was due to go down with Chairman McCall and Greg Meeks and my ranking member, Henry Cuellar, to meet with the Chinese embassy in Mexico. Because the visits we made in the past, they put on some big show and they'll have a big bust while you're down there, and then it goes right back to business as usual. You need to fight it at its source, and the source is the precursors coming in from China, one. Two, remember, all the investments China's made down in Mexico, everything taking things off those ships, Chinese. And they know where it's going, and they know what's happening. Secondly, from the Homeland Subcommittee, which I'm going to have to get going to shortly because we have our markup today, but one of the technologies they unfortunately are employing is now you don't even need a courier to go across the border. You could take a drone on the Mexican side and drop the package on the American side, and somebody could pick it up there and go and take off with it. And so think about it. You started off with cannabis, where you'd have bales, right? Then you went to cocaine, where you had kilos and bricks. And now a bag of pills can kill 50,000 people. And we're dropping it on a daily basis. And they're making it into things that kids know, like Adderall. At Ohio State, unfortunately, we had 2 young girls. Granted, they shouldn't have been taking it, getting ready for finals. Got some Adderall from somebody else, both dead. Every day, Buddy makes a great point, every day, everywhere. And until we're willing to declare war on it and use all the resources and all the arrows in our quiver as a country to go after this, we're losing this battle.
It's not just a healthcare issue, Jim. It is a national security issue, and it spans the industries. It's not just pharmaceuticals. It's not just the fentanyl issue. It is electronics. It is microtechnology. It is stealing our intellectual property. That's why we have a China task force that is looking at the whole spectrum of how to deal with China. But at the end of the day, and I know this sounds political, but there's only one way to say this: national security is the number one job of the chief executive, and he sits down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. They have to enforce the laws that are on the books today, because they're not, and so we're relying on the courts to catch up with this massive overload of lawsuits and aspects of enforcing the law, and it takes months, if not years, to work through some of those legal states to get these issues out there. It's sad that we are where we are, but we need a full court press. Both of these guys are exactly right. Until we declare a consistent war on what China is doing in all of its aspects, and I don't mean a kinetic war, you understand what I'm saying. Until we address what China's doing in flexing their economic muscle, their military muscle, their diplomatic muscle, and all that they're up to, until we have all 3 branches of government on the same page going after it, we're going to struggle in solving this problem.